Stay behind the yellow line, ma'am. The civilian observation deck is on the far side of the kennels, and frankly, you shouldn't even be on this side of the fence." Staff Sergeant Boker did not lower his voice when he said it, and the line of handlers along the run went quiet, the way a room goes quiet when everyone has decided not to be the one who gets caught looking. It was 0614 at the Tyndall Working Dog Detachment, the gravel still dark with the night's dew, and 16 war dogs were keyed up in their runs because Boker had spent the last 20 minutes throwing a bite sleeve and shouting to make them sing for the visitors. He gestured at the woman who had come through the side gate in plain canvas trousers and a faded gray jacket, no rank on her, no badge that he recognized, a thermos in one hand and a small, worn leather notebook in the other. "This is a live training environment," he said louder now for the handlers. "These are 16 multi-purpose canines, dual-certified patrol and detection, and the calmest of them will take your forearm off if you make a wrong sound. So unless somebody up the chain forgot to tell me a tour was coming, you can turn right back around." The woman did not turn around. She did not argue. She set the thermos down on the top rail of the fence, opened the worn notebook to a page already 3/4 filled with small block handwriting, and looked, not at Boker, but at the third run from the end, where a sable Belgian Malinois named Varga was throwing himself at the chain link hard enough to flex the posts. The dog they had stopped working last spring. The dog the detachment now called, in the after-hours way men name the things that scare them. The broken one. She let her eyes rest on Varga for 3 seconds, and then she did one thing. She let her shoulders come down a 1/4 inch that no one on the line would have noticed, and her breath went long and slow, in for 4, out for 6, the way you teach a frightened animal to find the floor under its own feet. Varga hit the fence twice more. Then he stopped. He stood with his head low, ears half back, watching the woman watch him. And for the first time in 11 months, the broken dog in the third run was quiet. Specialist Cantrell, 2 runs down, felt the hair stand up on his arms, and did not know why. Boker did not see it. He was already turning to the others, telling the story he had told himself, about who this woman was, and to Boker, that small, impossible quiet was nothing at all. To him, a civilian who did not flinch when he raised his voice was a civilian too dim to understand the danger she was in, and that, more than any shouted argument, was the thing that decided him. He would put her behind a yellow line, if he had to walk her there. He had no idea who had just walked through his gate. He had no idea that the page in her notebook had Varga's tattoo number written at the top of it in her own hand, dated 4 years back. And he had no idea that before the sun cleared the tree line, every one of the 16 dogs he was so proud of would lie down flat in the gravel on a single quiet word, and that not one of those words would be his. If you have ever stood at the edge of a place that used to be yours and listened to a loud man explain it back to you wrong, drop a comment and tell me where you were watching from. Stay with this one. There is a moment near the end you are going to want to be in the room for. Her name was Selvig Branveld, and 4 years earlier she had built the program Bakker, now ran like a circus. She did not tell him that. She told him nothing. And she stood at the rail with her thermos and her notebook, and let the morning fall apart in front of her, because she had learned a long time ago that the fastest way to lose an argument with a man like Boker was to start one. The detachment had been called something else then, before the reorganization, before the name on the gate changed and the founding cadre got scattered across 3 commands and the institutional memory drained out of the place like water out of a cracked canteen. Solvig had written the temperament protocol that the Army's whole multi-purpose canine pipeline still ran on. The one every handler in that gravel yard had been certified against without ever once being told whose name had been on the original document before it got scrubbed in the transfer. She had spent 6 years inside fences exactly like this one. She had certified dogs that were now legends in 3 theaters of war, and she had been quietly removed from the record of all of it 18 months ago. By a single administrative decision she had never been allowed to contest. So she watched, and she counted, the way she counted everything. She counted that Boker worked the dogs at full drive for the visitors and never once let one of them come down off it, which meant the dogs were living at a red line they could not sustain. She counted 4 dogs in the 16 showing displacement behavior, the small, frantic tales of an animal that has been pushed past its window and has no off-ramp. She counted that Varga, the sable in the 3rd run, had a healed notch in his left ear and a way of carrying his weight back off his right hindquarter, and she wrote the date down next to his tattoo number without changing her face. "You writing a complaint?" Boker had come back along the rail. He was a big man, sandy and sunburned, with the easy contempt of someone who has never been wrong in a way that cost him anything. "Mad. Because I get civilians out here once a quarter, animal welfare types, and they all want to write the same complaint. The dogs look stressed. The dogs are supposed to look stressed. They are weapons, ma'am. You don't pet a weapon." "No," Solvik said, "you don't." It was the first thing she had said. Boker waited for the rest of it, the lecture, the credentials, the threat to have his job, and when none of it came, he laughed, short and pleased, and decided he had won. Master Sergeant Bertram had not laughed. Bertram was the kennel master, a lean, gray man, 26 years in, and he had been standing in the doorway of the equipment shed since the side gate clicked open. He had watched the woman set down her thermos. He had watched Varga go quiet. And Bertram, who had handled dogs in 2 wars and had buried 4 of them, had gone very, very still, because he had seen a working dog come off a red line like that exactly twice in his life, and both times the person who did it had been someone you did not put behind a yellow line. He looked at the gray jacket with no rank on it, and at the worn notebook, and a cold idea began to assemble itself at the back of his mind. He stepped back inside the shed, took out his phone, and dialed a number he had not called in 3 years. "It's Bertram, out at Tyndall," he said quietly when it answered. "I've got a woman at my fence, no rank, gray jacket, civvy trousers, carrying a green notebook, with handwriting all down the pages. Talks about 4 words an hour. Just brought Varga down, off the wire, without touching him." He listened. His jaw tightened. "Yeah, that's what I thought too." He listened again, longer this time, and when he spoke once more, his voice had dropped to almost nothing. "Understood. I'll keep my mouth shut and I'll keep her on the post." "How long?" He put the phone away and went back out into the gravel, and he did not look at Solvik again because he was afraid that if he did, Boker would see it on his face. The morning had a clock on it now, though only 2 people in that yard knew it. There was a vehicle leaving a headquarters 90 minutes out, and on the seat beside the driver was a thin folder that had been locked in a drawer for a year and a half. The folder had Solveig Brandveld's name on the tab, and the man who had ordered it locked away was about to find out it had a copy. Boker, meanwhile, had decided the visitor would make a useful prop. "Tell you what," he announced, loud again, walking the line so the handlers could hear him be generous. "Since you came all this way to watch, let's give you something to write about. We're going to run obedience. 16 dogs, 1 yard, full control. You want to see what a real training program looks like, ma'am. You watch this." It was a mistake, and Bertram knew it was a mistake. The second the words left Boker's mouth, because you do not run 16 overdriven dogs in a single open yard to show off, not when 4 of them are already past their window, and Bertram opened his mouth to stop it. He was a beat too slow. The handlers brought the dogs out. For the first 90 seconds, it looked like exactly what Boker wanted it to look like. 16 dogs, 16 handlers, a wall of coiled muscle, holding the down stay on the gravel, while Boker walked the rank with his chest out. Solveig watched the dogs, and not the man. She watched the way the downstays were not really downstays, the way each dog was a clenched spring with its weight forward, watching its handler's hands for the next command, none of them actually resting, None of them actually settled. A real down is a dog that has decided the floor is safe. These were 16 dogs deciding nothing was safe and waiting to be told what to attack. She had built her whole career on the difference, and she could see it from 40 feet away. Then a gate latch banged in the wind, sharp and metal, and Varga broke. He came up out of the downstay with a sound that was not a bark, a low climbing note that every dog in that yard knew in its spine. And in the half-second, it took Specialist Cantrell to get a hand to the leash. 4 of the other dogs had broken with him. The red line tells. Solveig had counted in her notebook were not academic anymore. They were 16 dogs, going off at once in an open yard, with the founding cadre's protocol nowhere in the building, and a staff sergeant in the middle of it, whose whole training philosophy was volume. Bocker did the worst thing a man can do in a yard full of cresting dogs. He shouted. He shouted commands, overlapping, contradictory, his voice climbing to be heard over the dogs, and a dog at red line does not hear words, it hears alarm, and the alarm in Boker's voice poured gasoline on the thing he was trying to put out. 2 handlers went down to a knee hauling on leashes. Cantrell was being dragged sideways across the gravel by 90 pounds of Malinois that had stopped being a soldier and become a seizure with teeth. Varga had turned on the run nearest him, and the geometry of the whole yard was tilting toward the one thing every person there had trained their whole career to prevent: 16 war dogs deciding the threat was each other. Bertram was already moving. He would not get there in time, and he knew it. And Solveig Bramveld set down her notebook on the top rail, stepped over the yellow line Boker had threatened to walk her behind, and walked out into the middle of 16 cresting war dogs the way a person walks out onto thin ice they happen to have measured. "Stop!" Boker screamed at her. "Get out of there! You'll get killed! Get her! Out of there!" She did not run. She did not flinch. She walked to a spot near the center of the yard where the dogs could all see her. And she did not raise her hands, and she did not raise her voice, and she stopped. And then she became very still, in a way none of them had a word for. Not frozen. Settled. She let her weight drop into her heels, and her shoulders come down, and her breath go long. In for 4, hold, out for 6, and she turned her face very slightly away from the nearest dog so that nothing about her was a challenge, and into that small pocket of stillness she had made with her own body. She said one word. She did not shout it. She said it the way you say a thing to someone you have known for years and trust completely. A single low word in a language that was not English. 2 syllables falling, and the word landed in the yard like a stone dropped into deep water. Varga hit the gravel first. He went down so fast and so flat that Cantrell, still braced against a leash that had suddenly gone slack, stumbled forward and nearly fell over the dog. Varga lay flat on his side in the dirt, his flank heaving, his eyes locked on the woman, and he did not move. A half-second behind him, the dog beside him folded. Then, the next and the next, a wave of dropping bodies, rolling outward from the center of the yard where Solveig stood, 16 war dogs, going from a wall of violence to 16 flat shapes in the gravel, in the time it takes to breathe out once, all of them down, all of them silent, all of them watching the one quiet woman who had not touched a single one of them. The word she had said was not a magic word. There is no magic word. It was a command that those dogs, and every Army multi-purpose canine certified in the last 6 years, had been imprinted to from their first weeks in the program. An emergency, settle a single foreign word, chosen precisely because no handler would ever shout it by accident in English. A hard floor under any dog at any red line. A word built into the temperament protocol by the woman who wrote it. She had built the off-ramp into them years before any of these men ever held the leash. She had just used it. The yard was so quiet you could hear the flags. Solveig stood among the 16 flat dogs and let her breath go long one more time. And then she walked slow and unhurried to the 3rd run dog, the broken one, the one called Varga, and she crouched down beside him in the gravel. She still did not touch him. She put her hand palm up on the ground, near his nose, and waited. And after a moment, the dog that had not let a handler near him in 11 months stretched his neck out and put his chin in her open hand and let out a long, shuddering breath. And Solveig Brandveld closed her eyes for exactly 1 second, and then opened them and was still again. Behind her, Staff Sergeant Boker stood in the gravel with his mouth open and no sound coming out of it, which was, Bertram thought, the quietest the man had been all morning. But the morning was not over, and the dogs lying flat in the gravel were only half of what was about to be proven. Because the question hanging in that yard now, the question on every handler's face, was the question the whole place had been built to ask and had forgotten the answer to. Who was she? And Solveig was not going to tell them. She stood up from Varga and went back across the yellow line to the rail and picked up her notebook and her thermos, and she said, to no one in particular, in the same flat, even voice she had used on the dog, "You'll want to take Varga and the 2 on his left off the line for 30 days. They're past their window. They've been past it a long time." "You don't give orders here," Boker said. His voice had come back, and it had come back ugly, because a man who has just been shown to be small in front of the people he commands will reach for cruelty, the way a falling man reaches for anything. "I don't know what kind of trick that was, lady, some kind of stunt. But you do not give orders on my detachment. You want to play dog whisperer, you go do it on the internet. Out here, those are my dogs." "No," Solveig said again, the same 2 letters, and this time she did not look away when she said it. "They're not." Bertram, in the doorway of the shed, closed his eyes. It had taken Solveig 4 years and an 18-month silence to be standing in this gravel again, and the story of how she had been removed from it was the kind of story the army tells itself it does not tell. When the detachment reorganized, a new layer of command had come in, over the working dog program, and at the top of that layer was a man named Major Banfield, an administrator who had never handled a dog in his life, and who measured a program the way he measured everything, by how few problems it sent up the chain. Solveig had sent problems up the chain. She had grounded dogs. Banfield wanted certified on schedule. She had failed handlers. Banfield wanted passed for the numbers. And 18 months ago, when she stood in Banfield's office and told him to his face that Varga, the most promising dog the program had ever produced, was being broken by a training cadre that did not understand what they were doing to him, Banfield had decided the problem was not the dogs. The problem was her. The reassignment had come through in a week. The protocol document had been reversioned and her name taken off the authorship in the same quiet edit. There had been no hearing, because there is no hearing for being inconvenient. She had packed her things and driven away from a place that ran on a system she had built, with her name scrubbed off the front of it, and for 18 months she had let it lie, because she was not a woman who fought to be remembered. She had come back this morning for exactly one reason, and his name was Varga, and she had read in a quarterly welfare report, the kind nobody reads, that the dog was being walked toward a behavioral euthanasia. She knew he did not need. She had come to get one dog out. She had not planned to do any of the rest of it. The yard had forced her hand, the way an external threat in this kind of story always forces the secret out into the open. And now there were 16 dogs lying in the gravel, and a staff sergeant calling it a trick, and a clock she did not know about was 40 minutes from the gate. She picked up her thermos. "I'll need to see whoever runs this detachment now," she said. "About Varga, you're looking at him," Boker said. "No," said Master Sergeant Bertram, stepping out of the shed at last, and his voice carried the way a quiet man's voice carries when he has decided to spend the authority of 26 years all at once. "She's looking at me. I run the kennels, and I'd like everybody to step off the gravel and cool the dogs down, and I'd like the staff sergeant to stop talking, because the staff sergeant is about to embarrass himself worse than he already has." Boker rounded on him, and that was the moment the second engine of the morning the one that had been running quietly in the background since Bertram's phone call, came up over the horizon as a plain green vehicle turning in at the main gate, 90 minutes out reduced now to nothing. And the gate guard came to attention so sharply that every handler in the yard turned to look. The vehicle came to a stop, and a colonel got out. He was older than Boker, older than Bertram, a compact, silver-haired man with the deliberate movements of someone who has spent his career around animals that read sudden movement as a threat, and he had a thin folder in his hand. Colonel Brockwood had built the working dog pipeline that the entire army now ran on, and he had retired believing the worst administrative decision of his career was one he had failed to stop in time. He had spent 18 months being told the program was running fine. He had gotten a phone call 40 minutes ago that began with the words, "There's a woman at my fence with a green notebook," and he had not waited for his coffee. He walked across the yard. He did not look at Boker. He did not look at the 16 dogs, though his eyes went over them once, fast, professional, taking in the flat-settled bodies, and the 4 that were still trembling, and reading the whole state of the detachment in a single sweep, the way only one other person in that yard could. He walked to the rail where the woman in the gray jacket stood with a thermos, and he stopped in front of her. And for a long moment, the founder of the program and the woman who had written its protocol simply looked at each other. Then Colonel Brockwood came to attention and saluted her. It went through the yard like a current. A retired colonel, the legend whose name was on the schoolhouse, standing at attention in the gravel and holding a salute to a woman in canvas trousers, with no rank on her jacket, and not one of the handlers understood it yet, and all of them understood that it changed everything. "Sergeant Major Branveld," Brockwood said, and his voice was not steady. "Quite. I have been looking for you for a year and a half, Sergeant Major. The handlers heard it. Boker heard it." The woman he had threatened to walk behind the yellow line, the woman he had called a dog whisperer and told to go do it on the internet, was a sergeant major, and not just any sergeant major, because Brockwood was still talking, and what he said next took the last of the air out of Staff Sergeant Boker. "This is Command Sergeant Major Solveig Branveld," Brockwood said, turning so the whole yard could hear him, not raising his voice, because he had learned long ago from this very woman that you do not raise your voice in a yard full of dogs. She is the senior enlisted non-commissioned officer of the Army's entire military working dog program. She wrote the temperament protocol that every single one of you is certified against. The emergency settle command you all just watched her use, the one that put 16 cresting dogs on the ground without a hand laid on any of them. She designed that command. She built the off-ramp into your dogs years before any of you ever clipped on a leash. He paused. And 18 months ago, she was relieved of her oversight of this detachment and removed from the authorship of that protocol by an administrative action that I am here this morning to reverse. He held up the thin folder. This was the part that did the plot work, and Solveig knew it the moment she saw the folder, because the folder was not a medal and it was not an apology. It was a record, and a record is a thing you can prove. Inside it was the original protocol document, the version with her name on the authorship line and the reassignment order, and stapled to the reassignment order was the one piece of paper Major Banfield had been certain no one would ever pull, the welfare review Solveig had filed 18 months ago, the one that named Varga by tattoo number and predicted, in her small block handwriting, the exact way the dog would deteriorate if the cadre kept running him the way they were running him. Brockwood opened the folder to that page and held it up next to the third run dog, lying flat in the gravel, and he read the prediction aloud, the date on it 18 months old, and then he looked at the dog, and the prediction and the dog matched, line for line. The notch in the ear, the weight carried off the right hind, the red line with no off-ramp, every word of it. She was right, Brockwood said quietly. She was right 18 months ago in writing, with a date on it, and the chain of command grounded her judgment and certified the dogs on schedule anyway, because a man who had never handled a dog in his life decided that her being right was a bigger problem than the dogs being broken. He closed the folder. I have read this paragraph 40 times in the last hour. I am going to read it once more into the record this afternoon, and the man who signed the order that buried it is going to read it with me. End of 4. He did not name Major Banfield. He did not have to. The handlers who had been at the detachment 18 months understood exactly whose order had moved the woman who built their dogs out of the building, and the understanding moved through the yard quieter and more devastating than any shouted accusation could have been. Boker had not moved. He stood in the gravel with the flat dogs all around him, and the easy contempt had drained out of his sunburned face and left something underneath it that looked a great deal like fear, because Boker was not, in the end, a cruel man so much as a small one. A competent enough handler who had been handed a program he did not understand and had filled the hole where the understanding should have been, with volume. Shame in a man like that does not come out as apology. It comes out as the wild reaching for a way to still be right. I followed the training plan I was given, he said. His voice cracked on it. I ran the program the way the manual said to run it. Nobody ever told me. Nobody ever told me there was an off-ramp. Nobody ever told me the dogs had a settle word. It's not in the version of the protocol I was certified on. It's not in there. I'd have used it. I swear to God I'd have used it. And that, in the end, was the part that closed the trap, because Boker, scrambling, had just said the true thing. It was not in the version he was certified on. It had been edited out. When Major Banfield's office reversioned the protocol to scrub Solveig Brandveld's name off the authorship, the new version had also quietly dropped the emergency settle command, because the settle command was the clearest fingerprint of her philosophy in the whole document, the single clearest proof that the program belonged to her, and removing her name meant removing her hands, and removing her hands meant a generation of handlers had been certified on a protocol with the safety taken out of it. Boker had not failed to use the off-ramp because he was lazy. He had failed to use it because a man protecting his own administrative tidiness had cut the off-ramp out of the book. The trick Boker had accused her of was the one piece of competence the system had deleted to make a woman disappear. Solveig had not said anything in a while. She stood at the rail and let Brockwood do the talking, because the part of this that mattered to her was not happening at the rail. It was happening 4 feet away in the gravel, where Varga, the broken one, the one she had come for, lay with his chin still resting near where her hand had been, watching her with the wary, settling eyes of a dog who has just remembered, after a very long time, that the floor can be safe. She crouched down beside him again, and this was the only moment in the whole long morning that she let anything show, and she let it show the way she let everything show, which is to say, barely, which is to say, through her hands. She reached out and laid one palm flat and gentle along the dog's ribs, over the heaving flank, and she felt his heart slamming under her hand, and she held her hand there and breathed long and slow until she felt the heart begin, very gradually, to come down. Her jaw was tight, her eyes were bright, in a way she did not blink away, and did not wipe at a muscle, moved once at the corner of her mouth. "I'm sorry I left you here," she said to the dog, so low that only the dog and Specialist Cantrell, kneeling nearby, could hear it. "I let them tell me it wasn't my fight anymore. It was always my fight." She had buried a partner once years ago in a country whose name she did not say out loud in places like this. A dog named in a language that was not English. A dog who had walked her out of a wadi under fire and not walked out himself. And she had promised over that grave that she would never again let a good dog be spent by people who did not understand what they were spending. She had broken that promise for 18 months because she had let a man in an office make her believe she was a problem. She had come back this morning to keep it. She kept her hand on Varga's ribs until his heart came all the way down. And then she stood up, and she was still again, and the one permitted crack in her was closed. Specialist Cantrell, kneeling in the gravel beside the dog, was crying and did not care who saw. "Sergeant Major," Brockwood said gently, "whenever you're ready." She was ready. She turned to the yard full of handlers, the 16 dogs cooling on the ground, the staff sergeant, standing small in the middle of it, and she did not gloat, because gloating was not a thing she had ever once had time for. She spoke in the same flat, even voice she had used on the dog and on Boker, and on the morning, and she told them the only thing she had come there believing. "You don't pet a weapon," she said, and Boker flinched at his own words coming back. "He told you that this morning, and he was right about it, but these aren't weapons. A weapon doesn't get scared. A weapon doesn't break. A weapon doesn't lie in the dirt at a red line for 11 months, because the people responsible for it confused loud. For in control, she looked down the line. These are soldiers. They feel everything you feel, and they can't tell you. The only voice they have is their body, and every single one of them was screaming at you this morning, and you didn't have the word to answer them, because somebody took the word out of the book." She paused. "I'm putting it back, starting today. And the first thing every one of you is going to learn is that the loudest handler in the yard is always the one who understands the least." It was not a thesis aimed at the camera. It was a thing she said to 16 handlers, standing over 16 dogs, in a yard, in the cold morning, and it landed because every one of them had just watched it be true. The aftermath of a morning like that does not happen in a morning. It happened over the months that followed, and the months were where the meaning of it compounded. Major Banfield read the buried welfare review into the record that afternoon, with Colonel Brockwood standing beside him, because Brockwood made certain of it, and a man who has built his whole career on sending no problems up the chain discovers, when the problem he buried is read out in his own conference room with a date on it, that the chain runs both directions. Banfield was not court-martialed. The Army does not court-martial tidiness. But the authorship line of the protocol was corrected in every active version, Solveig Brandveld's name restored at the top of the document she had written, and the emergency settle command went back into the certification standard that month, and Banfield's name went on the memorandum that ordered it, which was, Brockwood observed dryly, a more fitting punishment than any board could have handed down, that the man be made to sign her name back into the place he had taken it from. Staff Sergeant Boker was not relieved. Solveig asked specifically that he not be, which surprised everyone. But Bertram, "He's not a bad handler," she said. "He's an untaught one. Relieving him just moves the holes somewhere else. Teach him and you fix it." So Boker was sent back through the schoolhouse to the foundational course, the one taught from the corrected protocol, and on the second day of it, the instructor played a recording of an emergency settle, bringing a cresting dog to the ground, and Boker, sitting in the back of the classroom, recognized the voice on the recording and put his face in his hands. He became, in the way of men who have been shown the size of what they did not know, one of the best students the schoolhouse had that year, and he never raised his voice in a yard again. And Varga came off the line for his 30 days, and then for 30 more, and he did not go back to the bite work that had broken him. Solveig took him. She had the standing to do it, and the founder's blessing, and a long, quiet promise to keep, and the broken dog of the third run finished his service walking the schoolhouse yard at the heel of the command sergeant major of the entire working dog program, a living demonstration for every new handler who came through, of what a dog looks like when somebody understood what they were spending and chose not to spend it. Master Sergeant Bertram retired the following spring. At his retirement, the detachment gave him a shadow box, and tucked into the corner of it where the small private things go was a worn green notebook with small block handwriting all down the pages, the one Solveig had carried through the gate that morning, the one with Varga's tattoo number at the top of a page dated 4 years back. She had given it to him herself. "You made the call," she told him. "I built the off-ramp. You're the one who picked up the phone." Bertram, who had buried 4 dogs and had not cried at any of the funerals, did not make it through the ceremony dry-eyed, and nobody in that yard held it against him. There is a kind of justice that arrives as a salute, and there is a kind that arrives as a name put back at the top of a page, and Solveig Brandveld had now received both. But the thing she carried out of Tyndale that did not fit in a folder or a shadow box, was the morning itself. The moment in the center of the yard, 16 war dogs cresting toward each other, and a staff sergeant shouting gasoline onto the fire. And one quiet woman stepping over a yellow line to say a single low word that an office had tried to delete from the world, and the word working anyway, because some things you build into the bones of a thing cannot be edited out by anyone who never understood they were there. She still keeps a notebook. There is always a tattoo number at the top of a page, somewhere in it. Always a date, always a dog she has not gotten to yet. And there are a great many dogs in a great many yards, run by men who have learned the wrong word and never the right one. A new report crossed her desk last week, from a detachment 3 states over, a young dog being walked toward the same euthanasia for the same reasons, by the same kind of loud man who confuses volume for control. She has read it 11 times. She is not driven out there yet, but she will. That is the way this kind of story ends, not with a closed door, but with a notebook, open to a new page, and a quiet woman who has remembered that it was always her fight. So, if a man with a loud voice ever stood in a place that belonged to you and explained it back to you wrong, you already know the only answer worth giving him. You don't argue. You wait. And then, when it matters, you say the one true word, quietly, and you let it land like a stone in deep water. There is another one of these waiting for you right now. The story of a woman everybody underestimated until the moment she could not be underestimated anymore. It is on the screen. Go watch it. And tell me in the comments, what was the one true word you wish you had said?